Welcome back, everyone, and I've got the notebook with me again. So it's time for another update on how things are going in the online permaculture design certificate course that we're taking. This week we spoke about methods, and let me tell you what, I have never been through a course where so much good, valuable information was compacted into such a short time frame. I've got a lot of notes to go through with you, so let's dig into it. One of the first things we spoke about this week was identifying the needs of individual elements and also what they produce. Not just the actual products that they have, but what their behaviors are and their intrinsic values, and how we can provide those needs and what we can do with all those products and behaviors. This is something that I feel is going to take some time up front to go through this thought process for each individual element. But I can see how eventually it becomes an intrinsic knowledge, where you simply look at an element and realize what it needs and understand what its values are to you. But I do believe that over time, as you continue to observe, you might notice additional needs or additional behaviors and products that you did not expect to see up front. We also spoke about the connections between different components in our design and how energy is expended on those. For example, a garden that's too far away from your home that you do need to maintain or harvest from perhaps several times a day. If it's too far away, you're not going to give it the maintenance or care that it needs or utilize it to the best of its ability. So by having it closer, you will spend less energy on having to walk back and forth and make better use out of that component. We also spoke about how to connect components to increase their connection. For example, some interesting ideas that have been used in other places, like having a coop connected to a greenhouse, where the heat released by the chickens can help produce extra heat inside of a greenhouse for overwintering. Then we got really in depth with zones and sectors, orientation and slope. Zones are something that we spoke about in a previous video that I made when I was first really getting interested in permaculture. However, Geoff, of course, went into more depth with this concept. One thing that I really like that he pointed out that I had not put in my previous video is that while each zone does represent how many times you're visiting an area and therefore what is going to be in those zones, he also pointed out that the harvest from zones further away will be greater per visit. So to break that down for you, a quick visit to and from the garden maybe gets you a few handfuls of lettuce, broccoli, or something like that for a meal that you're preparing. However, if you travel all the way out to zone 5 and you're a hunter and you're bringing back a deer, you have one visit but a much larger harvest. Or maybe you're traveling out to a wood lot and bringing back a large harvest of firewood for the winter. Even though the zone's further away and you visit it less frequently, chances are you're bringing back a larger harvest for each visit. Then we got really detailed into what things we would expect to see commonly in particular zones. Suffice to say, and to summarize as quickly as possible, Zone 1 has the most amount of elements inside of it because it's closest to our center of energy, or the home, and it's going to have the most interaction. As elements move away from the center of energy, then the number of elements decrease. While we may not have as great diversity further away, we will still probably have large areas of harvest. For example, main field crops further away than our actual home garden, but still might take up a larger area than what our home garden does. One part of the class this week that really meant a lot to me was when Geoff started showing different designs for zones that might come up. Now these were all just conceptual. He just wanted to show examples on how zones might be laid out. And it was a challenge for me because I had been wondering previously, especially for something like a urban lot, how were you going to plan around just a quarter acre with a house on it? And he explained that in very good detail, and then even would draw a design and then erase parts of it and provide different ways that it might have been arranged depending on the client's requests and needs. So I took a lot away from that section in particular. Then things got really crazy and we started to talk about sectors. Sectors is a wide variety of things and another layer to the map that we're starting to develop. It includes sun orientation, more specifically the orientation of the sun at midday midwinter and midday midsummer, and how that is in relation to the property that we're working on. We started talking about fire sectors, cold wind sectors, prevailing wind sectors, good views and bad views, 100-year floods, areas of early frost, and how each of those is either a good or bad or possibly either or type of situation. Seeing the sectors laid on top of a property map with the zones have already been laid out really starts to narrow down, and I can see now how we're ready to move into next week's discussion, which is about pattern. One real interesting method that Geoff shared with us in his traditional dry erase board fashion was how we start to think about the connections between different elements. He started talking about what he called a selection of random assemblies, and for this particular discussion he gave us an example of items that fall in the category of water and items that fall under a list of structures. Now, I'm sure neither one of these was totally comprehensive, but it provided us with a general way of thinking. Then we wanted to connect these elements together through random selection by putting some attaching phrases, such as attached to, over, beside, in, on, under, or containing. And then we would just draw lines from one to another and see what happens. In some cases, we might discover something that's a brand new idea, where we just thought out of the box and give us something to trial or experiment with, or might fit the unique situation we're seeing on a particular site. So for example, you might run into a greenhouse on top of a tank. And that might not make a lot of sense to you where you live, but somebody in a cold climate situation just might really appreciate having warm water heated by a greenhouse and providing thermal mass of that heated water to keep their greenhouse warm throughout the night. Or we might come across a connection that sounds a little more traditional, like trellis attached to tank, where we can use the vertical space of the tank to grow some vining fruits and vegetables. Yet again, I have to tell you that this isn't a comprehensive list of everything that we studied this week, but I think it's a fair overview of what we discussed, and it certainly provided us with greater understanding so that we can move forward as permaculture designers. I hope that you took something away from this and that it means something to you, and that you're willing to follow along on the playlist and learn along with us, so that as we become permaculture designers, we can answer your questions more fully. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.